We're delighted to welcome the Justice Secretary Robert Buckland to the show right now. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Lovely to speak to you. I know we're going to talk about the radical sentencing overhaul to cut crime, but I know my listeners will be most keen to learn about your thoughts on our test and trace system, the world-beating test and trace system we've been promised. Something's going horribly wrong when many people can't get a test in their local area. I've been told to get tested. They can't go back to work in a hospital or a care home or back in a school. Kids are missing lessons because they can't get tested. What's going wrong?
Well, Julia, we are seeing, understandably, as the schools have come back, an increase in demand for this as families have, the day-to-day challenges of temperatures with kids and, the sort of things that all of us are familiar with. And it's right that they want reassurance. They want to have those tests. Now, what is happening is that I think as that increase in demand has happened, the laboratories that we have, they're working valiantly to get these tests turned around, are having to deal with a huge wave. We are increasing the number of laboratories across the country that do this work. And we're also increasing the number of centres that actually offer tests. We've got 400 running now. We'll get that up to 500. But I accept that at the moment, we have a challenge, and I'm hearing directly from families and constituents with these problems. So we're not just shying away from it, but we are redoubling our efforts to make sure that we get that capacity increased and also get that turnaround sorted.
Right.
And Matt Hancock is going to announce his priority list very shortly.
All right. Well, credit where credit's due. 227,000 tests yesterday. It's massively ramped up in terms of capacity. Better late than never. It's 10 times what France has been doing. A point I've been making. I'm going to give credit where I think it's due, but you as that's where the good stuff ends, I'm afraid, Mr. Buckland. You as a government promised a world-beating test and trace system, promised that we could get back to normal, get back to the workplace, get back to school, and people could get tests, and it'd be really easy because any child had any possible risk, you can go and get tested. The Health Secretary, your colleague Matt Hancock, said, if you're in any doubt, get tested. Now we're being told off for going off and getting tested. Schools are having to partially shut because they think pupils have got the virus, but they can't get tests. You say we have challenges. Would you agree with me, and I think a lot of my listeners, that frankly this really isn't good enough and there's really no excuse for the government to have failed on the logistics of this, since it was entirely predictable there would be this uptick in demand?
Well, we've got work to do, and
so it's not good enough.
Well, no, we want to do better, because every family that is disrupted in this way causes me concern. And nobody's telling anybody off. These are difficult judgments. If somebody's genuinely concerned about the health of their child or their loved one, they're going to want to test. And I don't think we want to beat anybody up for that. But I think Matt's decision yesterday to announce a priority list, I think, will help everybody. So at the heart of that, of course, will be our NHS workers, then our social care workers, clearly important. And it seems to me that with the government's collective will to put education and the economy at the heart of things at the moment, then schools are going to be an important focus of that activity as well. I'm not going to prejudge what Matt is planning, but he's going to make an announcement in the next few days. And I think that's going to be of great assistance to all of us having to make these difficult judgment calls in the interests of our loved ones.
What do you make of what the Archbishop of Canterbury has said today to the Daily Telegraph? The Justin Welby has said that living with coronavirus over the winter months will only be sustainable or even endurable if we challenge our addiction to centralisation and go back to an age-old principle: only do centrally what must be done centrally, and says that the impact of the rule of life will be too restrictive on many people's family lives. Has the government got this wrong?
No, I've listened carefully to and read carefully what Archbishop Justin has said, and I'd say this: there is a huge amount of local initiative when it comes to dealing with this virus. We've got some really dedicated local public health leads in all our council areas. I'm lucky to have a really talented guy in Swindon, because we've had an uptick in the summer. And the work that they've been doing in order to locally deal with particular outbreaks and really get a grip on it has been impressive. But, without a degree of central government direction, I'm worried that we won't get that coordinated and clear and consistent response. We were criticised back in the spring because we weren't being central and directive enough in some respects, because people were worried that the government wasn't doing enough. For example, in care homes, we had that big and serious debate. But so I would say that we do need that central direction combined with the energy and local knowledge of local authorities and those agencies.
Let's also talk about what comes directly under your remit as Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary, and you've setting out a plan today for what you call smarter sentencing, which you hope will crack down on crime and protect the public by ensuring the most dangerous criminals are kept in prison for longer. What are you going to be doing?
Yes, so it's a big package, the most radical reform in 20 years. We're going to make sure that serious violent sexual offenders stay longer in prison. They will be serving longer proportions of their sentences before release. And then at the other end, where people who've got into the criminal justice system, frankly, could do with treatment and support for perhaps a drug or alcohol addiction or mental health problem, we're going to provide that. We're going to ramp up probation services, really get supervision right. And through those measures, I believe we can protect the public and start to reduce reoffending, which affects so many of our communities, particularly communities represented by many of my new colleagues who tell me that these measures are desperately needed.
I mean, a lot of my listeners will be very welcoming of this. A lot of people are concerned that whenever we talk about any sentencing, whatever it is, carrying a knife or terrorist activities, our main issue is the fact that they get sentenced to, say, 5 years or 8 years and they serve half that. So you're going to say the most serious violent criminals and terrorists will have to face 2/3 of their sentence before they can be looked at for release and then be strictly monitored. Why not just serve their sentence? Why do we insist on people having to have a cut to their sentence? If it's about good behaviour, surely the answer would be no good behaviour behind bars. You get a longer sentence, or maybe we could cut 10% off. Why move it from half to 2/3? What's the justification?
Well, first of all, I wanted to make sure that the bulk of the sentence was served in custody. But secondly, I don't think it would be right to just release prisoners without a licence condition. I want to make sure that these people are subject to conditions that mean that they can be recalled straight away on breach, which is what happens now quite rightly. But we also have, for even more serious offences, the end of automatic release. You know, I've done a lot of work to end automatic release for terrorists, for example, and I'm taking a new power today through the legislation that we'll pass to refer somebody who's been radicalised in prison. They might have been convicted of a non-terrorist offence, but we've got credible intelligence to suggest they've been radicalised, to refer them to the parole board and to end any automatic release in that case. So I'm really bearing down on the serious end, the people who pose a threat to the public, because public protection, I believe, has to be at the heart of our penal policy. And that's what I think prisons are suitable for, together with the work we can do to rehabilitate those who want to take that opportunity.
OK, just finally, let's talk about the Internal Markets Bill. You, of course, as Justice Secretary, have faced quite a lot of questioning about your future, whether you resign from your job, given that you've pledged to uphold the law, as these question marks about whether the new Internal Market Bill, in terms of how it rewrites the withdrawal agreement, is a breach of international law, something that was admitted by one of your colleagues, Brandon Lewis, Northern Ireland Secretary. There's now talk of a compromise between Tory rebels and the government involving basically a parliamentary lock. So if this bill does get passed, relating to obviously the changes to the withdrawal agreement and Northern Ireland protocols, that actually there would, before it was enacted, if it did have to be enacted, it's been called an insurance policy by the government, there would have to be another parliamentary vote. How involved in that negotiation and that compromise are you? Are you playing a role there to try and smooth things over so you don't have to perhaps either break international law or resign?
Well, look, these are matters ultimately for the business managers and the PM. I, like other colleagues, play an active role in talking to Conservative MPs from right across the spectrum of opinion. I think that's vital and particularly important at a time of COVID, when it's more difficult than usual to have those important conversations. There's already in the bill provision for these measures not to come into force unless certain parliamentary procedures happen. So the question is what the details should look like. I'm not going to get in that on the show now, but what I will say is that I think if we were in a position where we needed to use these measures, where there'd been a breakdown and that the EU had failed to honour its obligations of good faith and had really, messed up here, frankly, and not done the job that we expect them to do, then I don't believe any Conservative MP would vote against these measures. I think every Conservative MP would vote to support the Union of the United Kingdom and to take the protective measures that are included in this bill.
Just finally, briefly, this claim that if we breach international law, we're no longer the Britain that we think we are on the world stage, and we give a carte blanche to the likes of Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, the Iranian mullahs to do whatever they want as well. Do you think that Vladimir Putin decides what he's going to do based on whether Britain breaches an international agreement?
Frankly, no. I mean, he's shown no indication that in the past he's ever been really influenced by Britain's reputation. We've seen the appalling actions in Salisbury, for example. I think that is a lot of hyperbole. This is an international dispute, potentially. We will work night and day to get the deal done and to get the protocol sorted, but we are preparing for the sad eventuality, if it happens, of an international dispute. It does happen in politics. Nation states will disagree with each other. We might be in disagreement with the EU. We've got to be upfront and honest about ways of resolving that, and that is what we're trying to do.
Robert Buckland, thank you very much indeed for joining us.